It's an absolutely shocking look for Westminster, for Parliament, for the political class, isn't it, what happened today? Good evening to you.
Yeah, look, of course it is. It's Ben, it's shameful and it's embarrassing because, at the end of the day, we're talking about a humanitarian crisis which is taking place in Gaza. 29,000 people have lost their lives there, and I think it's important that as parliamentarians we reflect very carefully on the responsibility that we have got, and I think collectively coming together ensure leadership. Can I make two quick points? One of the things I'm pleased about over the last couple of years has been the unity over Ukraine, that we've demonstrated to Putin that we would stand shoulder to shoulder with those in Ukraine against Putin, against the aggression. When you consider what's happening in Gaza, 29,000 people having lost their lives already, the threat that there is to the people that are there in Rafah right now. And we have an opportunity to say, in a friendly manner to an ally, to Israel, that this has to stop, that we've got to find a way to not just peace in the short term, but a long-term solution to this as well. We have to go the extra mile. But rather than focusing on that, we're now talking about our shortcomings as a parliament. And if I may say so as well, you'll be aware in Parliament, we're very good at reflecting on particularly the anniversaries of the Holocaust, of Srebrenica, of Darfur. When you think about all of these things, we do that when we're reflecting on atrocities that have taken place. Well, goodness gracious, we're in the middle of one now. We have the evidence of the abuses, the human rights abuses that have gone on. We know people are starving, particularly in the north of Gaza. What are we doing? We as a parliament are falling apart. And I think your listeners will be looking on and wondering, what on earth is going on? What on earth are they playing at? And quite frankly, it isn't good enough.
I think that is the pretty common view, Ian, to be honest with you. Do you, as the SNP, need to take some responsibility for that? The irony here is all three main parties agree now on the need for a ceasefire, even if you call it slightly different things. Labour tabled a different motion to yours. Could you not have, just for the sake of the unity you're talking about, got behind their motion, backed it, supported it, and we would have had tonight the UK Parliament endorsing a ceasefire in the Middle East, which is ultimately what you want?
Well, we actually did. We were in the voting lobbies ready to go and vote for that Labour motion. I regret that we were in the position that we were in because, to be clear, and I don't want it to be about us, and I don't want it to be about other parties. But the fact remains is that we had a very straightforward motion on an immediate ceasefire. And the way that these opposition days work, we get 2 a year, maybe 3 a year. And the government may seek, as they had today, to amend our motion. But crucially, Parliament would have had the opportunity to vote for our motion first. And then the government can seek to amend that. And it's up to us to try and see if we can build a consensus, a majority in the House. What happened today was the clerks warned the Speaker that as a consequence of breaching precedent and protocol and allowing a Labour motion to go down, that motion would be taken before the SNP one. And if it was passed, that would have knocked the SNP motion out. Highly irregular. I don't want to make it about that. And I certainly
with respect, Ian, you have, as a party, made it about that. You had motions that basically said the same thing, and you're all there quibbling about who's actually got to be voted on and whose was better worded, whereas the fundamentals were there.
Absolutely, and we are where we are tonight. And one of the things I've said is that we need to find a way through this, and I hope there's an opportunity over the course of the next few days that Parliament can vote on a substantive motion on a ceasefire, because that's what's important. It has been shameful what has taken place today. I said in interventions and other speakers, I said in my own speech, that we had a duty to come together. And look, I'll praise MPs, whether it's on the Labour Party or indeed a number of Conservatives, that came out in that debate and said that the case for a ceasefire has now been made. Let's come together. Let's show that leadership. Not let's just do that in Parliament, but let's make sure that we're doing that through the United Nations and through the Security Council, because if not now, when? When are we going to do it? And we need to make sure that we resolve this. Having had that shambles of today, we now need to deal with the situation.
Should the Speaker in the chair, if that vote does happen in the coming days, should that Speaker be Lindsay Hoyle? Do you still have confidence in him to keep that right?
Well, I regret the position that we're in tonight, and I can understand that the Speaker has taken the decisions for him for very good reasons, and he's obviously offered to meet with leaders of all parties, with the chief whips. And I think there'll be some hard talking at those meetings. But, for me, fundamentally, the issue is about Gaza. The issue is about how we get a ceasefire. The issue is about how we make sure that Hamas are held to account, the hostages are released. How do we get to a two-state solution? If we end up making this about us, about Parliament, then quite frankly, we've missed the point of what we should be doing.
That's very true. It's also legitimate to ask whether you still have confidence as a member of Parliament in the House of Commons Speaker who presides over debates in that Parliament.
I would make the point that Parliament tonight has shown itself to be dysfunctional. It's not good enough, and we have to find a way through it. I'm not the kind of person that starts to blame individuals and call for people's heads. I think it's more important at this stage that we reflect on what has happened, that we fix the problem, that we have a motion that will allow us to express our view, and I hope that Parliament can vote for a ceasefire. Let us do that, and then we can deal with the issues of the office holders.
Given that, Ian, are you of the view that your successor, Stephen Flynn, was wrong to make this an issue of confidence in Sir Lindsay Hoyle?
Well, look, let's wait and see what's going to happen. I know that Stephen will be meeting with the Speaker over the course of the coming days. So let's see what happens when these talks take place.
Quite a few of your colleagues have signed that motion expressing no confidence in him, though.
Yeah, and I think the Speaker has some explaining to do in terms of how we got to the position that we were in today. And the fact that there was advice from the clerks, and I'm going to have it in front of me, and the clerk's letter says the procedural impact of the decision taken today is that the first decision is likely to be the official opposition's amendment rather than an SNP motion. And depending on the outcome of any such division, it is possible that the House will not be able to vote on the SNP motion. That's what happened. And, what is the point of having that third-party status, being able to put motions down, if you're then stymied through the processes of Parliament and you're not given that opportunity to have a vote on something as important as this?
Good to have you on the programme. Really grateful for your time tonight. Thank you. Ian Blackford, former Westminster leader of the SNP and now still MP for Ross, Skye and Lochaber. Interesting. I mean, fair play to Ian. He admits it's an absolute disgrace what went on. It is, isn't it? Unarguably, in my view. 10:27 is the time. Let's talk to Andrew in Halifax about all of this. Andrew, good evening.
Good evening. Well, there's a couple of things that struck me from tonight's shenanigans. One, all these impassioned MPs in the Commons. It's just a pity they can never be as impassioned about, say, homeless veterans on the streets or the waiting list in our hospitals as they can about events that are almost 2,000 miles away. That's the first thing that struck me. And the second thing is, I understand that the Speaker allowed this motion because he was concerned for MPs' safety. Have I got that correct?
That's the suggestion, yep.
Right, OK. Well, it just really called into question just what sort of vile ideologies we've spent decades importing into this country and allowing to flourish.
Oh, hold on.
Our own elected representatives.
What are you suggesting there, Andrew? What have we imported?
Well, what I'm suggesting is that we have imported radical religions and people who adhere to the overthrow of society with the use of those radical religions to the point that our very democracy and our democratic representatives are imperiled. Pardon?
Who's calling for the overthrow of society in the UK?
It doesn't matter. They're not. They don't have to call for it. They demonstrate that that's their intent by the actions that they do. I mean, those repulsive rivers of humanity that meander their way through central London every week for jihad and one thing or another.
But they're protesting against the killing of innocent people in Gaza, aren't they? That's what they're doing.
Yeah, but it's very strange that they can never ever protest about, when the Uyghur Muslims in China were being persecuted, or the millions that have died under, Assad in Syria.
Well, I agree.
It's only when Israel and the Jews.
But to call them a sewer of humanity for perhaps not protesting as much about one issue as another, I think is pretty unfair, Andrew, to be honest with you. But I appreciate the call. Thank you. Let's go to Paul in Twickenham. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Ben. The two casualties really of today were Sir Lindsay Hoyle, who was an honourable man. He did the right thing. His apology was genuine and heartfelt. I felt he emerged as honourable. I watched the whole of the debate, and what was extremely disappointing was the standard of debate.
Shocking.
We heard a lot. There was not one MP who tackled the question at the heart of this matter is calling for a ceasefire practical and sensible? The answer is yes, but no one explained why. To call for a ceasefire, first of all, it does not mean to call for the surrender of Israel, the laying down by Israel of its arms permanently, and an invitation to be walked over. That is not what is being called for. Secondly, not one single MP made a link between the release of the hostages held in Gaza, which is awful and needs to happen, with the release of the several thousand people from the West Bank who are currently held in prisons in Israel since October the 7th, taken every night without charge, without evidence, simply arrested and put into prison.
Well, we don't know without evidence. Some of them are likely guilty, Paul. Others may well not be. You're right. We can't say there's no evidence.
Well, there's huge swathes of people who under the what's called the military rule instead of the they don't have to be charged. They don't have to be due process. Not one MP said that if we call for a ceasefire, the boot remains on Israel's foot, because if Hamas does not also, then surrender its prisoners in exchange, its hostages in exchange for prisoners, then we can move forward. Not one MP suggested that the next step should be after the exchange of prisoners, the next practical step, apart from the delivery of aid, should be taking the whole case to the UN, a conference in the of
Paul, does it matter?
Countries.
Does any of it matter? Because there are those that say, and they're right to say it, I think, that yes, it's important, yes, it's symbolic, but ultimately whatever was voted on in Parliament today isn't going to make the blindest bit of difference.
I disagree, Ben. It's very, very important. What we say and what we do in this Parliament is widely reported across the world.
It might be, but it's not going to change much, is it?
It matters. We have a seat on the Security Council. The problem is, Ben, that I think there's a huge resistance on the part of the Conservative Party and our representatives at the UN to the idea of a ceasefire. Why? Because they think that people who advocate a ceasefire are so naive or stupid.
David Cameron is calling for a ceasefire. He's our Foreign Secretary, and he's certainly a Conservative.
There's a huge resistance amongst the Conservative Party. We heard it from Tobias Ellwood, who said no one understands what a ceasefire
Paul,
is.
The man who leads on this stuff for the Conservative Party is calling for a ceasefire.
Yes, but he's a lone voice then in the Tory party.
He speaks for the government. He's the Foreign Secretary.
Yeah, well, he's not cutting the mustard in with his own party.
You can't
Ben, the key point is this: calls for a ceasefire are calls to say to Israel, look, day one, stop shooting.
But it's not just Israel, is it? It's calls on both sides to stop the violence. And right now, that seems a very unlikely prospect. Paul, thank you for the call. I don't think you can say the Foreign Secretary calling for a ceasefire, given he is the Tory spokesperson on foreign affairs like this, means the Tories are resisting a ceasefire. In fact, he called for a ceasefire before Labour did, in fact.